Hey friends, welcome to Class 5, Part 3 of the Crease Pattern Series, Introduction to Shaping Bases. And so this part, we're going to be covering the other side of shaping that I mentioned previously, which is taking your own creative directive away from the designer. So we did this guy in the last video, and now we're going to be talking more about this guy and how to achieve that. And so at the tail end of the last video, if you didn't see it, I kind of mentioned the use of glue. So we'll get into that as well, and just kind of its importance and its little controversy. But for the most part, this video will just be giving pointers and talking about things to think about as you go for this. To fold and shape something such as this guy is more of like an advanced shaping. So like guide to get to this kind of level will probably be in the more advanced shaping tutorial or like a shaping masterclass video. But yeah, so let's get into it. All right, so let's get into talking about the shaping. So how did I go from, seeing this guy from the crease pattern to the designer's photo, to shaping it like the designer, to this guy, which is, still the same crease pattern, still the same structures, but shaped way differently than the designer's photo. And we'll talk about these guys a little bit later. But the main key thing here is I didn't use the designer's photo as a reference. And the goal for this guy is obviously to get more of like a scorpion type look. So instead of using the designer's photo, I just Googled a real picture of a scorpion. And obviously Google will give you like a ton of photos. So you have a ton of different references. I've seen scorpions in real life before. And even in just art classes I took in school before, the teacher would also always recommend to have some kind of reference to draw on, because oftentimes your memory will, skew things or whatnot, which is totally fine. But for the sake of this, to get it to look like a scorpion, I wanted to look at a scorpion, so I know what to do. And obviously some of the changes you can see here are that a lot of real scorpions don't actually have long mandibles like this. They're like tucked in under here. So I just shaped out those mandibles. I just hid them under, actually just squash folded on top to get a little bit of a head detail. Scorpions also, their legs obviously aren't single jointed like these ones are. They have a various amount of joints. So I tried to stick 3 in with a small tab for a foot. And their abdomens are also pleated, but this design doesn't have the structure for that. That's totally fine. But then, generally a scorpion, the smaller the pinchers, the bigger the tail. So I tried to get like a long stinger. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get it 100% exact unless if you really design it yourself. But at least for using this design, I think I was able to achieve quite a decent result out of the scorpion. You can also tell the body is really flat. And if it were to be on ground, the body's raised on the legs. Another small detail that really just helps add to the aesthetic. The pinchers, they're very long and thin, and in the pose, they're very wide. And I chose this because in the photos, the coolest looking photos of scorpions have the scorpions with a really wide pose. When they're attacking or hunting or defending, they keep it wide to make themselves look big and grasp inwards to strike. So I really liked that kind of look for a scorpion, and I don't like them just sticking straight forward. So those are kind of the design choices I made by looking at a picture of a real scorpion. And so that is something that you can also do with either like this design or pretty much any design of something in nature. Even things like dragons, you can Obviously, dragons aren't real, but you can look at photos of people's interpretations of dragons to get inspiration. Try to base different parts, like a wing feature, off those. If you're folding humans, you can look at humans, find their proportions, all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the biggest things to start shaping with this, and kind of the main focus I want to tell you guys to practice when you decide to try going away from the designer's original interpretation. Without doing this, oftentimes I see people, or even myself, just kind of scrunching paper together, and really like there's not as much thought into it, and the result you can kind of tell. Yeah, while scrunching is, okay in some senses, you want to try not to do as much as possible. You want to have some kind of form and order, such as like the legs here. I have specifically two pointing forward, two pointing backwards on both sides, and whatnot. But yeah, let's get into some more little tips. All right, so you guys might be wondering why we have these over here. So this is methyl cellulose in powder form, and then this is Elmer's glue, which is just white glue, craft glue, the most standard cheap white glue you could find, So yeah, why are these guys here? And that kind of ties into the second point I want to talk about when you're going to try aiming for a different little direction with your fold. And now this is very specific. This again, there's not like a right way to do things, not a single way, because origami's art. So, tons of interpretations. But at least in my reasoning, whenever I want to try to go for something like this, I want the finished product to actually look finished. So if you're not exactly sure what that means, this is something else I also learned from art classes in school, is that your completed artwork or whatever you're doing, you want to do your best to display it and to finish it in a way that it looks complete, a complete artwork. And since art is very visual, that is a very important part of that. And so what do I mean? So obviously, if you look here, Ricardo's, it looks complete. This is absolutely beautiful. If you look at mine right here, it's all right, but it's kind of sloppy in some parts. It doesn't quite look complete. And the key features are, the legs are kind of all over the place. The arms, they kind of fell back into each other, and some of the flaps are lifting up. On the side, we have all these open flaps up. And it's like, these aren't thinned out, On the back, some of the crimps we were pulling in, they're super thick. The outside reverse fold doesn't stay closed. All that kind of sorts of stuff all contribute to making this guy not look complete. And if in the same way, if I folded this guy and did the shaping of something like this and just left it, because this guy uses a lot more folds that compress into the model a ton, it would look crazy. All the flaps would be everywhere. It wouldn't be thin. The body wouldn't be thin, as I mentioned. The legs wouldn't be strong. They wouldn't be upwards. The tail would be floppy, whatnot. And yeah, so that's a whole lot. And essentially what I'm saying is it's okay to use some things to help you out to make it look complete. And obviously it's not overkill. So these are really controversial. This is much more controversial than this. This is basically a paper hardener. So you can see it's for bookbinding, paper repair, and art framing. It's not quite like a glue, but it can act like a glue. It's water-based. It'll soak into paper and like make it more rigid. So if I wanted to shape this guy, I could take some MC, hold this closed, like with my hand or some wire, soak the paper a little bit, and when it hardens, it'll harden just like this. It's a very similar technique to use with like wet folding, except it's chemically assisted because this thin paper won't treat wet folding as something like watercolor paper. Um, but again, you can also kind of use it like a glue. I could fill in all these layers, squeeze it really tight, and then it would stick the layers of paper together, um, just like glue would. And in that sense, since this guy is a little bit more expensive and takes more to prepare than this guy, it's very common to use glue as an alternative to do things like that, to save time and energy. And you know, and the other thing is this, while it is partially water-based, it's not super water-based. So some issues you get with this guy is if you use too much or if it's too watery, your paper will warp and you'll see it, and it ruins the aesthetic. Again, it doesn't look complete. Versus this guy won't really do that as much. But you want to use a limited amount. You don't want to glop on glue. You don't want to rely on glue. You want to rely mostly on the paper, but these are just things to assist you. So hopefully that kind of demystifies what these guys are. I do not count using glue as cheating. What I would count as cheating is, say, like, oh, if I wanted claws or antennas and then I glue another piece of paper on, that's not okay. Or if so like additional gluing, that's why I don't, I consider cutting to be cheating. Still personal preference, but in this sense, you can see what I did here still 100% resembles the paper. You can see all the layers. There's nothing chopped out. There's nothing attached. You can see all the folds I made to keep this rigid. I actually didn't need to use glue for this part just because this Unreal compresses a lot and it's super thin. So yeah, another misconception, once people start using glue, a lot of times they just coat the whole thing. You don't really want to do that unless you're doing like a display model where you know there's risk of it getting damaged. In that case, yeah, make this thing super solid. Protect it as much as you're able to. But yeah, so don't be afraid to use this. I know some people, they might be purists out there, but if you really want to level up your shaping game, it's a great tool to practice with, and again, not to rely on. Same thing with methyl cellulose. Both these two have their own purposes, and I've been able to talk to some very talented folders and get their take on these, and a lot of the super complex designers and folders that do things like this guy or others, and even works that you guys might be familiar with, designs and designers that you might be familiar with, they'll use glue, and that's just part of it. They're traveling with their models, they need to protect it, and also they want to aim to make it look as complete as possible. So yeah, try some of those things out when you're going for a completed model. You can even do that if you're going for this guy with this, especially if your paper isn't, automatically going to give you this perfect flat folding structure. Just try to beautify it, make it look, as good as possible. And that's really going to improve your shaping. But yeah, in other terms, besides these guys, other things to note about kind of approaching this style of shaping is something I mentioned in the first video. So if you haven't seen that, make sure you watch that, watch them in order. Talking about balance and unbalanced poses. So this guy is a balanced pose, just because it's the scorpion. I don't know, an unbalanced pose, I didn't really want to do that, but feel free to experiment with some of that. And if you don't want to know what I mean, go back to that video. That topic is a little bit more of an advanced shaping topic, so I'm not going to cover that a ton here. I just wanted to reference it. But yeah. All right, and then the last little bit of this video is going to be pretty short, and that's just going to cover the Beatle exercise that we had a little bit ago. This one's my design. This is basically just a collapsed base, and this is like a mildly shaped one. And yeah, some viewers requested I just kind of add this in, talk about it a little bit, and kind of give you guys some pointers. Obviously, this Beatle was not designed from a real Beatle. This was just creative imagination. put together because I thought the first half of the base could kind of resemble a beetle. So this is much more of a representational origami piece versus a more realistic origami piece like this guy. However, that doesn't mean you can't apply some of the shaping tips and mentalities I gave in both this video and some of the other videos. So obviously this one is done with Kami, which, you know, it's a little bit limited in paper, and the design itself structure is a little bit limited. But even so, you could see this is no glue at all. I still tried to add some small details just for practice. And so one of those things is rounding out the shell, giving that little V structure. And that's just something some beetles have. So I'm like, why not put that in there? The head, I did a little crimp, so it overlays and it gives some 3D aspects of it. And again, just crimping it in. I actually did this on the other one too, but you know, a couple of mountain valley folds, very simple. According to this. And the legs, I just basically folded them in half as thin as possible. They're not long enough where I could add joints, but maybe if you used a better paper, you could add joints looking like this and some toes. But yeah, so even on simple models like these, there's a lot of room to practice, especially since they're quick to fold. You can just mess around with it and do what you want. But the other kind of focus for this is you want to practice shaping with folds. So everything I described here was pretty much done with mountain folds, valley folds, even these thin guys. They're just mountain folds precisely in half and in half again, or sometimes in thirds. And then from there, you can curve them. You can add joints by crimping. But yeah, that's going to net you a little bit cleaner of a result. So if you wanted to transform this into something looking a lot like this, obviously you could add glue and whatnot. But before all of that, you want to use folds and not squish as much as possible. An example of a squish is probably this leg, where you can see even though I folded it in half, the paper just slid out and is no thinner than the next. So yeah, try that, have some patience with it. Don't just squish things together and use glue. That's what I mean by relying on glue too much. Don't do that. Fold it first, then you know you can apply glue, or it's fine on its own. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy that little bit. I know it was a lot of talking. I know maybe it's a little bit long, but these are some things that hopefully will improve your shaping, give you some confidence and direction when you just have a base and don't know what to do from there. And yeah, thanks for making it through these 3 videos. There'll be more to come. Subscribe to my channel so you can see the upcoming videos of the crease pattern series. And in the next class, we're going to dive into some more complex box pleat structures. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.
All this origami, all this origami, all this origami got me going kamikaze now.